My grandpa looked at me and said, "A woman makes a home, a man just has a house." Welcome to Wandering the Wild Mess with Heather Morgan. I am so happy you're here. In this episode, I want to dive into that really profound perspective from an 88-year-old man and what happens when the place you've called home fractures, a marriage ends, someone passes, and the walls hold different memories. I want to unpack what makes a space feel like a haven and how we can find home within ourselves. So, a little backstory to a recent visit back home to Utah. My grandmother passed away at 96, and my grandparents were married for 48 years. So a second marriage, which again is kind of insane to get divorced. My mom's parents back then, but I realized that their divorce made my mother feel more open to hearing that I was getting divorced. So for that, I am thankful. And both my grandparents on my mom's side remarried, just amazing people and matches for them, which honestly is something that has given me hope through this divorce process that, I could be married to someone for almost another 50 plus years if I find the right person. And that's exciting. But also just understanding that in talking to my grandpa, it broke my heart to hear that thought, because I really think when you find the right partner and when you think about men and women and the dynamic in their relationship, there's just so much value that both partners bring to a relationship and a marriage that I don't think we often think about. And in talking to my grandfather about his first marriage to my grandma, who has also passed, I realized that when you're young, you just don't really know. We already don't know what we're doing. But at some point, you're like, this feels right. This is what I'm doing. You jump in, you get married, you start the family, all the things, whatever that path looks like. You're just going through the motions and you don't know what you're doing, but you're like naive enough to think that there's going to be a moment in time where you do. Suddenly, you're going to hit this age and you're going to be like, oh, wow, this marriage thing really got easier. Oh, all of these things that I wanted for my life are just falling into place because I got a little older. And then that just doesn't happen. And you're like, when is this going to happen? And you realize that you started making a lot of big decisions in your life on the basis that you would eventually have it all figured out. And one day it would snap. Here we go. Got it all together. Everything makes sense. Thank goodness. And in talking to my grandfather, I mean, obviously I'm a curious person and I had asked so many questions. He had so much love and admiration for both of his wives, to be honest. But I don't think his marriage with my grandma, his first wife, he reflected on that 20-something-year-old man that he was, knowing that he probably didn't put forth what he would have thought would be a wonderful husband, because he didn't know really how to be one yet. And there was a lot he didn't know about my grandmother and her life at the time. So it's interesting to hear how there's so much in our lives that we're kind of just learning about people as we go, and we're just kind of in it, so we just stay. And it happens so often. And I think even now, it was definitely more back then. Like he's telling me when he came over to Salt Lake when his mother, my great grandmother, became Mormon and they came to Utah from Kentucky in the 40s. And hearing those stories, I'm like, life was like completely different. It's not even like people had 20 kids. He said there was this woman with 20 kids. there was like 5 of them would every day be peeling potatoes, like outside this restaurant. Like, I don't know why I can't fathom that to be a real thing, but it feels weird. And so much of life is just when you ask questions, you're kind of like, and you actually get an honest answer from someone, you're like, phew. Like, I feel like so many times we just all, and in a lot of things in our life, have just been, we sweep so much under the rug. And then when it's like said out loud, we're like, that's weird. Like, that's what was happening. But when no one talks about it, it's just kind of like what it is. And everyone just goes through the motions. But I think when we're like truly authentic about like a situation, we can go, oh, well, that's kind of why it panned out that way. And I realized so many times in hearing my grandpa, like, it's almost as if, and I am not saying first marriages can't work. And I am not saying that you can't make, you just have to evolve with the person. But I do think there's value in what I saw in this man. Like, this man told me, my grandfather, when I was getting divorced, I don't know if I mentioned this, but he said to me, he called me on the phone. He knew we were getting separated. I didn't really tell my family much detail about anything. And he said, well, are you doing okay? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I'd really like to call your ex-husband. Obviously, he knew him. I was like, Grandpa, I'm not having you, like, in my head, I'm like, okay, I'm not having you call him and ask him how he's doing when his grandfather is, when his when his granddaughter is divorcing him. Like, I'm not, like, plus my grandpa is kind of losing it a little. Like, he used to call my ex-husband the wrong name sometimes. And the last thing my ex-husband needed is my grandpa calling him to like ask how he was doing with the divorce from his granddaughter. That's what I felt. But I was like, Grandpa, like, you sure you want to call him? Like, I don't know if that's like the greatest idea. And my grandfather says to me, Heather, I know how hard it is to get divorced, and I would rather die than get divorced again. Die. I mean, and I think sometimes, and I hope that everyone's divorce is not that difficult, but I have yet to meet someone that's talked to me about their divorce and not had it be like something that was I don't even think you prepare for it. It's probably like the same level of like, and I can't relate to this, like having a child where your whole life just feels like, I didn't know it was going to feel like this. I didn't know it was going to be this hard. I didn't know I'd have all these emotions. I didn't know all these things. I think the difference, obviously, I don't know, but in having children is because then you're like, that's the rest of your life and there's no way around it. And then obviously you can't just cope with all these things, or you can, but not advised, because you have this little child. Where a divorce, you're just coping and being an absolute wreck and mess and crazy person most of the time, because your emotions are just like, what is happening? My whole life's turned upside down. So although that wasn't the place I was in, I could understand why my grandfather would say that, because it's such an overwhelming thing. But the silver lining is in this next chapter when he married my grandma Ramona, beautiful woman from Wyoming that came up to Salt Lake City, Utah for a new life after she had raised her boys and they joined the military, and she came here and started a new life and met my grandfather while he was walking to go meet this other woman at the same apartment complex that my grandma lived in. By the way, that was a whole other story. And it's just weird to me. But so then he meets her, and then they spend the rest of her life together. And that's beautiful. And I think sometimes when you're young and you get married and you don't know what you're doing, the time away from that first marriage allows you to reflect on how you could have been a been a better partner or found a better partner for you. I think there's so much convenience in people that you are drawn to when you're young, and there's so much evolution that sometimes you just can't show up for yourself or your partner the way you need to because you don't know how. And you both don't know how. And as I sat there and I'm at the funeral, and my grandmother was getting cremated. So her funeral was a few weeks after her death so that she could have family from Wyoming and other places come. And I realized too in this, as we're standing there, and we never really talked about the Mormon religion. So my grandmother, she was not Mormon. And so we never talked about it with her, which was fine. But she always still supported us. So it was beautiful, like coming to my baptism and all the things. But she was Catholic. And they were telling a story. Well, not a story, but the truth. There was a Catholic priest doing the ceremony for her funeral. And he told the story of, and my grandpa obviously was raised in the church. His mom brought him out to Utah from Kentucky, a whole long story there. But my grandmother was Catholic. They made it work. They did their thing. And when the priest was speaking, he told a story of my grandfather when my grandma was at the very end of her life. Him like frantically coming into the church and saying, I need a priest. I need a priest. My wife is dying. And for some reason that choked me up so much because I think that's like the most beautiful thing about loving people in our lives is that even when we believe or think differently about certain things, or we can still find a love and respect for their wishes. And I thought that was just such a genuine act of like last act of like love to make sure that even though at this point she probably didn't really know what was happening, that she had her wishes lived through. I guess all I'm saying here is that there's so much about love and life that's so much more complicated than we were fed to believe. I think the younger me was just like fairy tale, great songs. Oh my gosh, we're so in love. Everything's just amazing all the time. And then you're like, oh, like, what version is this? Like, I don't know. Like, why I thought it was supposed to be totally different. And then you start learning more about other people's lives and you're like, what? What is actually happening? And it's just so wild to me that we beat ourselves up and put so much pressure on ourselves to have this like perfect understanding of life and how to be, and especially at such a young age. And we just never get there. We just evolve. We just hopefully self-reflect enough to grow and to mature. But some people, it's wild, but they never do. They never do. I get told that all the time where people are like, I talk to people of all ages all the time. I'm just a curious mind. And I realize that like it's a lot about where do you want to evolve your mind? Because I think there's some people that are stuck in a place of I'm not evolving here. And then there's other people that are like, I never want that to be my life again. And it's almost like you can create a whole new one. It seems to me like learning now about my grandparents in their first marriage and the little things that I'm learning, I'm like, who was that couple? Because those weren't my grandparents. Like, I'm like, I don't even know who they were. But you get to change who you are at any point in time. And that to me was just evident of that after learning about the life that my grandparents led before I was born. It was so different than my perception of their life as a child and up until the point that I knew anything about their previous life. And so it gave me a little piece, and I wanted to give that to y'all. That it is okay. Like, you probably won't be anywhere near the same person in the next 5 or 10 years if you care enough to evolve. If you want to see better things come from yourself, you're probably going to change aspects of your life. You're probably going to bring different people in. You're probably going to hopefully grow with your partner or find a partner that works best for you. You're going to potentially start a new career, work at a different company. Like, all of these things I think are finally, and hopefully, that's why I'm saying this message to y'all, is that I think for so long it was just like, this is the path, that's it. But then when I learned about people's lives, it's like, no, that wasn't just the path. They did that path. That path didn't work out. It didn't pan out. Now they went on this path and they were much happier. I feel like that people that are the happiest and most able to self-reflect in life have always evolved and changed when they realized that what they were doing, how they were acting, how they were thinking, and who they surrounded themselves just wasn't for them anymore. And it's not in a rude way. It's not in that. It's just in a way to say that just wasn't working. I think we have to find sometimes like a breaking point. And then we go, this is just not going to do it. And when I heard from my grandpa, him having to, both of their experiences. So my grandpa and then my grandma and my step grandma, I'll call her, but I never did. Like, their first marriages, it was just like, no, that wasn't it. They were just kind of waiting out to leave. And I remember, now this is before I was divorced, my grandma, so my grandpa's first wife. This is getting all kinds of confusing. Sorry. Anyways, first wife grandma, my mom's mom, told me, she looked me dead in the eye. We were driving after a day of shopping. I don't even know why this was on topic. I don't even recall if I was married at the time, but nowhere near thinking about divorce. And she says, she's talking about my grandpa, Jerry, her second husband, who had passed. And she said, I would have never divorced your grandpa, her first husband. But I am so happy that he did divorce me, because I never would have known what it felt like to really be in love. And so I say that all to remind, probably to make myself feel better in some ways, but also to remind you, if you're listening, that like, rejection is often just a beautiful redirection to something much better for us. And although painful in the moment, it becomes the best thing that ever happened to us more often than not. I know my grandpa, my mom's dad, would say something similar about how glad he was that he left his first wife and found my grandma Ramona. And that doesn't mean they didn't like each other. Like, growing up, my grandparents, all 4 of them, the divorced ones, all came to the family events. I'm not kidding. I didn't even know divorce was weird. I thought everyone just got along after it. It took me a long time to realize that some people just cannot be in the same room. My grandparents were all in the same room. It was my baptism. All 4 of them were there. It was, if it was one of somebody's birthday, the kid, like, as my cousins, they were all there. One of the last times before my mom's mom died, we went to dinner with my grandma, my grandpa, and both his first. So my grandpa's both his first and second wife, and my mom and sister. because it was just like, didn't matter anymore. And I think that just goes to show the beauty of evolving and not and being able to forgive and understand that sometimes people are just in your life for a period of time, and then it's it's over. And we can all eat at the same table because it doesn't really matter that much in the scheme of life. I guarantee you, on my grandmother's deathbed, my mom's mom, she was not thinking how mad she was that she got divorced, that he divorced her, how bad it was. None of that. She loved all of us, and she was just grateful to have married the love of her life the second time around. It's not that big of a deal. It's not that serious anymore. And I want you to remember that when things happen in your life, when you want to hold on to things that just don't matter that much. And I know I'm coming at this from a place of just, I've been messy, but I have not been mad. And I think I can be messy and do things that I'm like, who is this girl? But I'll tell you at the end of the day, like, I don't take anything that serious. It's not that big of a deal. It doesn't even matter. And it's so freeing. It's so freeing. And I want to tell you something that's so beautiful, though, because I think love is so beautiful. And life is my favorite thing right now. And when I was talking to my grandpa tonight, I'm kind of pivoting around because I just have a lot of gratitude and happiness in my life right now. But it's an Ella Langley again line. I swear she can't miss. And I wanted this for my grandmother. So I'm kind of dedicating this to her as I bounce around on just being all right with rejection being redirection into what's meant for you. But the line says, I only talk to God every now and then, and to thank him for you. Guess he knew what he was doing when he sent you my way. You were the only chance I ever had at being saved. I know that my grandfather feels that way. I know that as humans, we all just make mistakes and we don't always get it right the first time around, but it's not that it's wrong. It's just that it's not forever. And as I think about my grandmother, the past, Grandma Ramona, I had written down like a line that someone had written. One of the neighbors, she walked every day in her neighborhood, every single day. This woman's 96. And she always had the best outfits. She always looked amazing. And even on these cold walks in Utah, we're talking like below zero, like freezing degrees, she would walk. And they said something that said that I couldn't help but absolutely love. And now I need to, I don't want to mess it up, but it said that she was a little, don't let me mess it up. She was a bit of sunshine on a cloudy day, and she probably had no clue. A stranger in her neighborhood that saw her walking said that about her. Like, how cute is that? And I'm saying that because at the end of the day, we're all going to go. Nobody gets to stay. Wild, I know, but true. That at least they fed us the truth on. And so it's just like, what would I want some random stranger to say about me? And I know at the end of the day, how people perceive me is really none of my business. But it's an interesting thing to think about. So I will end this by saying what my grandpa said at the beginning. A woman makes a home. A man just has a house. And I think that it doesn't matter if what he's really just saying is love. makes a home. So maybe you're somewhere in your life and you're in a house, but it doesn't feel like a home. Whether that's your partner or the way that you just feel by yourself. All the love that we really need, as cheesy as it sounds, is within us. All the love we need. But it's so much easier to seek it from other people because loving ourselves takes a lot of work. Because everything we ever thought we did wrong, every mistake we ever made, every person that let us down, we're all thinking that that's something wrong with us. But I'm here to tell you that it's not. There's nothing wrong with you. There's not anything wrong with you. And once you can love yourself a lot, then your house, yourself, becomes a home, not just a house. And a home just feels so much better to be in. So much better. Thank you for listening to Wandering the Wild Mess with Heather Morgan. You matter.